Hi, quick demo to show the Forge region is now available in staging. So if you go to staging.fil.one, you log in, you can now go to your buckets section, hit create bucket, and you will see a new region. We called it EU Central Free because that's approximately where the Forge network is deployed. And we're running this particular instance of the network because it's just for testing at the moment, just to make sure things are working and for testing things out. But you should be able to select that now. And this region is backed by this staging Forge network. So I'm going to call this my memes bucket. And I can create the bucket here. And you can see it's been created now, and I should be able to select a file to upload. Let's have a look. Let's choose my favorite GIF. Let us choose Lost Dog. That's a good favorite. Cool. So there we go. That one, and we will upload him. There it is, and I should be able to click through. I can download it, but I can hopefully also get a... there we go. There it is. Lost Dog is available on the Forge network, and that's about it. Okay, let's have a look at how Forge fits in with Fil One and all of those systems. So let's start off here with this reasonably simple diagram. It might get more complicated. The US region, FTH, was recently launched. So now we have Aurora and FTH. And the setup for Fil One kind of looks like this, where we've got these two kind of regional providers. We've got a Fil One console over here, and we've got our users who will typically log in to the Fil One console, and they will create buckets, create access keys. But for the most part, they will talk directly to these regional providers like FTH, like these little yellow bits, which is the kind of S3 gateway, the API to talk S3 to these regional providers. So they will put objects and get objects via this this kind of S3 gateway that each of these regional providers are running. But how do these regional providers know that it's okay to let this particular user in? Well, it's a little bit more complicated because what actually happens is when a user requests to create a bucket or an access key, that request is kind of forwarded on to each of these regional providers to something we call the tenant management APIs, and that basically allows these regional providers to know that that tenants exist. They call them tenants, not users. Tenants exist, and buckets exist, and access keys exist, and the access key should be allowed to access buckets. These tenant management APIs are both different. That's why they are purple and red. Both of these providers expose different, very subtly different. They do kind of do the same things, but the actual API, the way in which we talk to them, is ever so slightly different. So when we added FTH, it meant that we actually had to add code to Fil One in order to enable it, which is not great, but it was necessary at the time. It is also quite a considerable thing for a regional provider to take on this tenant management task. Like, it's a lot of code there that they're going to have to write in order to kind of segregate buckets from each other, storing access keys and those secrets securely. And there's kind of APIs in there for like disabling tenants. So if we find them to be a bad tenant, or if they decide that they want to delete their account, then we need to kind of disable those tenants from the console in the region, so they stop being allowed to access the gateway. They also need to implement like enough of the S3 API for what we require. And that's relatively simple when you're thinking about just putting objects and getting objects. But we also support things like versioning. So you can have multiple versions of a given object and be able to get hold of any particular version. And we've got legal holds. We have retention configurations so that files cannot be deleted for a certain amount of time. And you kind of need an engineering team to build all of that stuff. If you don't already, well, you might already have it, but if you don't, then you're going to have to get some engineering team involved to build those APIs, to build that gateway, and to maintain it and add new features to it. Should we require extra features or things. But that's also kind of a burden for Fil One, because every time we want to add a feature, we then have to go to each one of these regional providers and be like, hey, can you build this thing for us so that we can add a thing? And we need to coordinate that with each one of these regional providers. That, is 2 at the moment, which isn't so bad, but what if we had like 5? And then the kind of timelines for that get pushed out by the lowest common denominator. We can't launch it until everyone has implemented that particular feature. So there's some kind of issues here. There's also a big kind of trust layer. So Aurora and FTH both have to create and store secret access keys. They need to store them securely. We don't want them to be leaked in any way, so we're trusting them to store that information securely. They also encrypt data at rest, or at least that's what we're trusting them to do. They have the keys to do that, and they have the keys to be able to decrypt that data when people want to read it. So again, another big trust area. They also provide us with metrics on bucket usage. So like I said, when users interact with a bucket, they're talking directly to these regional providers. Like, we don't know when people have necessarily uploaded objects. So we trust these regional providers to tell us how much data is in each bucket. And for the most part, that should be true, but that is just a issue that we have. We are trusting them to do that, and there's no actual evidence that is provided by them or proof that the operations have happened. We just kind of have to take their word for it. The other big trust issue, like a big thing for us, is that we're sort of trusting our regional providers that there is some Filecoin integration there. They are either proving data using PDP or putting data in actual Filecoin deals and having that being proved by POREP. But that's completely opaque to us. We have no actual means of determining whether that's happening or not with these providers. And that is another thing, in addition to the tenant management API, the S3 gateway APIs that they need to implement, that they, as an engineering team, would have to make sure they have created and implemented, so in a way that allows new data to be put on Filecoin, data that is deleted to be removed from Filecoin, and continually proved over the course of it being stored. So, yeah. Big things. So yeah, we remove a lot of those barriers to entry with a Forge appliance. And what I mean by that is, like, onboarding a new region becomes a case of all you need to actually bring is some storage, so some hard drives, a machine to run this piece of software on, and a Postgres database for the most part. So what we're doing here is when we have like the Stark Corporation come on to serve the EU East 1 region, or Aperture Laboratories come on board to serve US West 1, all they have to do is run the Forge appliance, bring some storage and a Postgres database, and that's basically it. What we've done is we've moved this kind of whole concept of tenant management out. It doesn't actually need to be a provider concern at all. And so we run this tenant management service. And just as a side note, what we've done there is we've actually designed it as an open standard, and that ensures that we don't have to do any more work or add any more code to Fil One to onboard another region. It's literally just configuration, and everyone uses the same API. So it means we can do something like this, where imagine we had Wayne Industries come on board and they acted in the same way as FTH or Aurora. They would if we convince them to expose the same open API standard as we are using for our Forge appliances, then adding Wayne Enterprises in the same way as Aurora or FTH would be a no code change for us to Fil One. We'd just have to configure it, and then that would be a big big barrier for us to adding removed for us to adding a new region. But that's only half the story. The other half of the story is removing the barrier for actual regional providers to become a region, and to do that, we get them to run the Forge appliance. The other cool thing about running the Forge appliance is we gain transparency over the Filecoin integration. So we know that the Forge appliance is proving data and submitting it to Filecoin because we own that software, and we run it on regional providers. And the way in which the Forge network works is that everything is transparent and signed by UCAN authorizations. Talking of UCAN authorizations, we actually gain accountability for ingress and egress because all UCAN operations, all operations on the network are signed by UCAN. So we know that there's a proof in there that says that this particular request to put an object happened, or this particular request to get an object happened, and these are the bytes that were requested, and we can actually trace that back to the exact access key that requested it. The other cool thing about this Forge appliance that is a piece of software that we create and the regional operators run is that we gain the ability to ship changes. I talked earlier about how if we did want to ship like a new feature to either of these regions, we'd have to coordinate with both of them to make sure that they get their engineering teams to do the work to implement the feature, and we're kind of bound by their timelines on that. When we have a Forge appliance installed at regional providers, we would do the work ourselves. We would have the Forge appliance auto update itself and ship it when we want to on our terms. So that's good. The other cool thing, the last cool thing, and kind of baked in from the very start thing that we don't have with our current regional providers is this like assurance over content integrity. We know via Forge and the Forge network that all data is hash addressed. It is baked in from the get-go. So we know that there is this kind of assurance over content integrity because we hash address everything, and that all of that addressing stuff is just built into Forge from the get-go as part of the uploading blobs and retrieving blobs. It's all hash addressed. Yeah. So that is how Forge fits in with the Fil One system. Let us talk about what's inside that appliance. So this bit, we're going to look specifically at the Stark Corporation and the appliance that they are running, which exposes a S3 gateway. So let's double click on that. Now, like I said before, we've lowered the barrier to becoming a regional provider by removing that kind of tenant management aspect. All that providers need to bring is the storage, so the hard drives, these bits, and a database. This is kind of operational data for the Forge node that's running. They just need to be able to kind of store tasks that need to be done and register the fact that they are storing particular chunks of data, etc., etc. And the third thing they need to provide is like a machine. This could be like a VM, or it can be a bare metal machine, but it needs to run the Forge Appliance software. So let's look inside the Forge Appliance. And we can see that it's actually just two co-located services. We've got a Piri node, which is a regular Piri node that runs on the Forge network. There's no real difference here in terms of the node that's being run by this regional provider versus a Piri node that could run independently on the Forge network. They are it just so happens that it is co-located with this other service that we like to call Ingot. Ingot is a kind of S3 facade, and that means that's kind of a fancy term for being like it's an S3 gateway. Its job is to translate incoming S3 API requests into Forge network requests. So it's kind of a kind of translation layer, and it allows users to talk S3, but actually behind the scenes that is being translated into a kind of Forge network call. So either putting data or retrieving data on the Forge network. So what happens is we've got kind of users and they log into the Fil One console as kind of usual. They create buckets and access keys, and as usual, when that happens, these requests are forwarded onto a tenant management API service, which is being run, which we're running, and this is the Forge tenant management service, and we like to call this the HILT. Because it's kind of like the place that stores the keys and the handles for people's identities and stuff like that. But HILT's job is basically to create and store access keys per tenant, but also to set up Fil One users as kind of users on the Forge network, so that when users actually try and interact with this regional provider, and Ingot does its job of translation from S3 request to Forge request, it will be able to write into the Forge network because the entities are kind of known entities. So that's HILT's job. So yeah, it does two basic things, which are kind of create a customer. So the Forge network has the idea of like a customer or a user who is kind of paying for storage, but it also has the idea of buckets. In Forge, buckets are basically we call them spaces in Forge, but they're basically the same thing. You can think of them as the same thing. So yeah, we add a space, configure a space, say that the provider, the storage service for this space is going to be the Forge network. So that's HILT's tenant management thing, is to basically map Fil One users to Forge network users. So when S3 API requests come in to Ingot, Ingot actually goes off to the tenant management API and goes off to HILT. And it authorizes a request, and the process of actually authorizing that request results in delegations or UCAN delegations being sent back to Ingot, which allow Ingot to use the Forge network. UK delegations are just kind of signed kind of certificates that say that can be used by Ingot to operate in the Forge network, to write to it and read from it. And then that's kind of it. From then on, Ingot just acts like a regular Forge client. We have a Forge client called Guppy. It's a very similar sort of thing. It uses a lot of the same code to write data into the network and read data from it. So if you know the Forge network, this will look pretty similar to how Guppy works. The process is basically registering the fact that you want to upload a chunk of data with the upload service. So you call a kind of capability called blob add, and you tell it the hash of the data that you want to store and its size. And what the upload service does is it picks a particular storage node, it allocates some space on the storage node, and then then Ingot will actually put that data onto the storage node, and then it'll send back a kind of notification to the upload service that says, I've put the data. The upload service would then check with that node and say, hey, did you receive that data? Just making sure. So we call that accepting the data. And that's basically it. The magic here is that Ingot and Piri have an affinity. So every time we try and add some data, like typically when you ask the upload service to store some data in the Forge network, it will look at the list of kind of registered storage providers and make a judgment call about which one is the best one to put the data to. In Ingot's case, that will always be the Piri node that is co-located with it. So we call that affinity. So the Ingot node has affinity to a particular Piri node that is running co-located. And then the kind of cool thing about this is that this flow of like adding a blob and uploading it kind of can be collapsed down into just receiving the blob, writing it, and then Piri saying, yeah, I've got it already, don't worry about uploading it, kind of thing. So but that's kind of a optimization that is coming, and that's pretty much it that happens in the upload service. The only thing left to say is that, well, actually I already kind of said it, was that this Piri node that's running here is not really any different to other Piri nodes that are running on the upload service. The only difference is this affinity that it has when this particular client, the Ingot service, decides to upload data. It always gets this one. But that's basically it. That's how the Forge appliance works. That's how it fits in with Fil One. And that is my presentation. Thank you very much for listening.